Welcome back to Theology in Action. Again, I'm Levi Heitree here with Dr. Tony Caffey. How's your day?
Levi, good to see you, man. Ready to talk some theology.
Yeah. So today we've got a interesting topic. I think we'll have plenty to chew on when we get into it. And today's topic is being made in the image of God. First, I think most direct question is, what would you say it means to be made in the image of God?
Yes, this is something that's uniquely Christian too. You might say Judeo-Christian, because when you come at this question without the benefit of Scripture, without the benefit of Christian faith, you really don't end up anywhere meaningful. And if your worldview is derived from, let's say, an evolutionary framework, you have primordial goop that all of a sudden becomes self-aware, and that's how you derive meaning or dignity as a human being. It's not very substantive. And so I think as there is something in the human psyche and the human nature that says we are different, we are important, we're unique, but why? Some atheists would say we're not. We're just a bunch of molecules who are randomly kind of gathered, and then the world will cease to exist and it'll all be over. That's not very compelling, or there's something inside of the human being that says, no, we got to be more than that. There's something more to it. And that takes us to the Scriptures that say we are a created being by a creator, and we're created different from the other created things, even the other organic living things. So, the basis of our faith and the basis of our worldview in terms of Christianity, Judeo-Christian worldview, if you want to say it that way, is God created the entire world, everything we see, even beyond what we can see in the world. And on the sixth day, after he created the rest of the animal kingdom, he created human beings, and he created them in his image. And that's different. That's substantively different than the rest of the animal kingdom. Yeah. So that's who we are. We are, yes, we're animals, and I'm okay saying that. We're a mammal. I've even said before, I think it comes from Philip Yancey. He talks about Jesus, part of his incarnation is that he became a mammal. And that's really shocking, the idea that, yes, Jesus became a mammal. What does that mean? He became a human being. And that's glorious in terms of his incarnation and how he became like us. But we are a part of the animal kingdom, and yet we're distinct. We're the only species that's made in God's image. Yeah. Genesis 2 even goes on to describe the breathing into our nostrils, the breath of life, which is different from the animals as well. So that's what it means to be human in the Christian tradition.
Okay. So as you started kind of touching on it, I think as you read through Genesis 1 and into 2, there is that clear distinction that man and woman are the only ones that was made in God's image. So you are making a clear distinction between man and animals and how we should perceive humans compared to how we should perceive animals.
Yes.
Okay. Can you kind of elaborate on your perspective on that?
Yeah, so the theological term is imago Dei, which is Latin for image of God. Actually, my son is taking Latin right now, so he says it's imago Dei. So I don't know Latin well enough to know, but that takes too long. So I'm just going to say imago Dei. And there's an aspect. So what does that mean? Okay, we're made in the image of God. There are certain attributes, certain aspects of God that he has actually implanted inside of man. So there's a God likeness that we have as human beings, but there's also an animal likeness. Okay. And so that's the intersection for human beings. Part of what that means, I believe, theologically, is that we have this self-awareness, we have a conscience, and animals do as well, but it's different. It's quite different, actually. We have the ability to discern good and evil. Our instincts are more refined than the animal kingdom, which reflects that aspect of our God-likeness. We can communicate in ways that the animal kingdom can't. You might say, well, whales talk to one another, they whistle or whatever they do, and dogs bark. Yeah, they communicate, but it's very primitive compared to what we're doing right now. We're recording a podcast. People are listening to us. There's the power to innovate and create. Humans build skyscrapers. Dogs don't, not yet anyway. Beavers build dams, but there's not a whole lot more to that than just instinct, and that's not always good either, that what they're doing in terms of building dams. Human beings engineer things in a way that's way different than the animal kingdom. We have the power even now to travel into outer space, to build these microprocessors that can store an incredible amount of information. We build these things called iPhones that are little brains. We're all little cyborgs running around because of how powerful these things are. That's just different than the animal kingdom. And I think that's a reflection of us being made in the image of God. And I'll add one more thing to this. This is a little bit debated, but Ecclesiastes talks about eternity in the hearts of men. Yeah. And I do think that's an aspect of our Imago Dei essence as well, is that we are created to live forever. We're eternal beings. And so that's part of the Christian worldview as well, that we believe that everybody's going to live forever, every human being, I should say, somewhere, either in the presence of God or separated from God forever. So I think that's, at least philosophically, wrapped up into this idea of us being image bearers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You keep answering parts of my question before I ask them, but you just touched on a subject. Would you say that all men, Christian or not, are created in some aspect in the image of God?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's a fundamental Christian doctrine.
Yeah.
So, and there's a common grace aspect to that that's passed down to every human. There's dignity passed on to every human being. And so, even if I were to argue against the demeaning of human beings in other parts of the world, in some parts of India, there was child sacrifice historically, or the actually sacrifice of a widow after the husband died. That was a practice that William Carey actually sought to eliminate in India. Child sacrifice has been part of some pagan kingdoms historically. In our modern day world, we have things like euthanasia. We have the whole eugenics movement, which was actually quite popular in America at the turn of the 20th century. A lot of people don't know that, but and Hitler used that to do some really terrible things. That mentality. How do I argue against that, even in places where there's not a Christian foundation, a Christian worldview? It's because there's dignity bound up in us being made in the image of God, and that dignity and that the humanness that we have needs to be protected, needs to be honored. And so I think that's, in terms of common grace, that's a gift also that our Christian theological bearings gives to the world. Yeah. There's a lot of negativity about like what Christianity brings to the world, and people can harp on all different kinds of things. But as you trace the movement of Christianity historically, it has always brought good things into the world, whether that meant, the elimination of slavery, William Wilberforce in England and in other places, or the way in which they influenced the Roman Empire in a powerful way to give dignity to orphans and those who were adopted, those children that were kind of just left on the streets in the Roman Empire. The Christians were initially the ones that were bringing those people into their houses, adopting people into their homes, because they had this conviction inside of them. This is an image bearer, this child, this young boy, this young girl. And so I see that. I know I'm a pastor, and so I've got an agenda, but that's part of what I see as one of the gifts that Christianity gives to the world is we're uplifting this idea of human dignity. And I don't think you can really derive that from other worldviews, certainly not the atheistic worldview.
Okay. Yeah. I would agree completely. I have heard many talk about the broken image and kind of what that means. And can you put into terms, can you define that kind of in a clear manner for us?
Yeah, the church fathers, as they wrestled with this, they actually thought the image of God was, some of the church fathers, was removed at the fall. So we're made in the image of God, and then Genesis 3, now all of a sudden the image of God is compromised or obliterated. I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
So we carry with us, past Genesis 3 into our modern world, this image bearing. But, and I think this is what you're alluding to, there's fallenness.
Yes.
And so there's
Yes.
depravity. And we carry that right into the world even as we're born. We have this sin nature.
Yeah.
We have this propensity for evil. And I think you can get carried away with that on both sides of that. You say, oh, we're image bearers, we're God-like. Look how great human beings are. There's this overly optimistic view of how good human beings are. And that even trickles into the secular world as well. It was people like Rousseau who thought children are born innocent and they're only corrupted by their horrible parents.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. Any parent will tell you that there's a natural inclination for sin with their children, and that's part of how we are. So if you overemphasize the made in the image of God and de-emphasize the depravity that's built inside of us, you're gonna miss the way in which we really are, and the biblical tension that the biblical truth that's held in tension between that. If you overemphasize human depravity, which some of the church fathers did, unfortunately, some over-eager theologians over time too have emphasized depravity. We're so depraved, we're so evil, yes, we are, but we're also image bearers. There's also common grace. There's also a conscience and an instinct that's part of us being made like God. That's part of the human equation as well. Even an atheist, even somebody who's opposed to God, there is good built into them by their image bearing. So those two things need to be held in tension. We are made in the image of God, but also Genesis 3, we're depraved. And that's why we needed the image bearer, Jesus Christ, to come into our world, who actually circumvented what we call original sin because of the virgin birth. He doesn't have a father like you or I do or the rest of the world. He was conceived by the Holy Spirit, bypassing original sin, still fully human, but also divine and sinless. And he becomes for us the perfect one that saves us from our sins.
That's awesome. It's always just kind of a stunning, amazing thing to think about on that aspect. Obviously, there is some responsibility and weight and some brevity in the fact that we are image bearers. What does that mean to a Christian? How should that affect their lifestyle, I suppose?
Well, we're going back. I'm going to go back to politics, which that was our first podcast,
yeah.
right? But those children in the womb are image bearers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that image bearing predates their birth. I think it's right to call children in the womb preborn children. So there has been attempts at the turn of the 20th century to, limit the reproductive capacities of certain ethnicities or those people who had certain mental handicaps, and I think that's just wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to protect, for all human beings, this concept of being made in the image of God, even if there are certain limitations that they have. Those who do have mental handicaps, or those who are from a more impoverished part of the world or our community. The person who is born on the other side of the world, totally different from an American person, that person is made in the image of God. In an Aboriginal tribe on another part of the world, maybe a primitive existence that's totally different from my quote-unquote modern-day American world, that person is made in the image of God, just like I am made in the image of God. And, I'm Scots-Irish.
Sure.
So we used to be naked in the woods of Britain 3,000 years ago, too.
Native American. I used to be naked in these woods around here somewhere. So, yeah.
I even heard one of the Jewish prime ministers said that once, that they were kind of throwing some anti-Semitic statements towards him. And he told them, well, when your ancestors were naked in the woods of Britain, Moses handed down the law to my people, and we were all literate. So,
Yeah.
that's a great response. But But even in that, we need to be careful that
Sure.
that we protect the dignity, the human
Yeah.
dignity and sanctity of each human life. So back to politics, that should inform the way in which we vote. That
Yeah.
should inform the way in which we advocate. That should inform the way in which we, um, and not even beyond those issues as well, and the way in which we think about justice and fairness
Yeah.
and the way that we distribute and adjudicate issues needs to be fair without partiality on people, regardless of their color or their
Yeah.
sex or their socioeconomic
Yeah.
background.
Absolutely. As we're talking about this, and it kind of just a reminder of even just in a individual's everyday Christian walk and how they treat who they run into in Walmart or HEB, or the homeless guy on the corner he is also an image bearer, and he should be treated as such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I think the common place everyone can go to is, and we talked about it a little bit, is the Genesis 1. Is there any other places, New Testament, Old Testament, that we see Scripture tell us we're image bearers?
Well, there's a few different places in Genesis that reinforce that.
Okay.
Psalm 8 is kind of a go-to passage that I've dealt with even recently in preaching. And what I love about Psalm 8 is it strikes the right balance between the insignificance of man before God, but also combined with that, the great significance that man has before God for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So what is man that you're mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care about him? Why does God care about little old us?
Yeah.
The God who created all of these galaxies and all
Right.
of these stars and, 7 billion people in our world. Well, who am I
Yeah.
before all of that?
Yet he has our hairs numbered. It's
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes. And yet, even as part of that psalm, there's this description about how God has uniquely created man to be different from the animal kingdom. And he does care about him. And that goes right into the New Testament. That goes right into the idea that, God became a man in order to save men. He didn't become a dog in order to save dogs. Love dogs. Dogs are great. He didn't become a cat to save cats. He didn't even become an angel to save the fallen angels.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me. That angels, really, as I understand angelology, there was a once for all time opportunity to either show their allegiance to God or show their allegiance to Satan. And once that was done, it was done. And their eternity was basically set at that point. God did differently. And angels long to look into these things, this plan of redemption that God has set out for human beings. So Psalm 8 is a good place to go for how we put together the idea of our createdness and our humanness and our smallness, but also the care and the love and the redemption that God puts in place for human beings as well.
Yeah. So are there any, we'll go to where we always like to go, is the how-tos, the practicals. Can you think of any practical steps one might take, or changes in their day-to-day, or just their thought or perspective that a Christian might need to apply knowing this?
Yeah, and let me offend some people as we close here. When I was a kid, I had a dog named Tasha that I loved, my German Shepherd. And we were hiking with my dad, and we were kind of in a dangerous place where we were hiking up on top of a hillside. And so I love my dog, Tasha, and I had her by the leash, and we were, walking with her. And my dad, as my dad was wont to do when I was young, he pulled me aside and he gave me this stiff rebuke, and he said, "If that dog falls off of this cliff, you let go of the leash immediately, and don't you dare try to go after or try to and of course I was probably crying. I don't remember. It was like, no, not Tasha.
Yeah.
But what he was teaching in that moment is that, son, I know you love your dog. I know this dog is precious to you, and we have dominion over the world. We're to care for our animals, and I've got cats now that I take care of. Probably take too good a care of them sometimes. But my dad was teaching me something in that, and he wouldn't have used Imago Dei, or he wouldn't have used some of that theological terminology, but he was showing me there's a substantive difference between you and that dog. And my utmost priority as your father is to protect you and to value your life even above hers. So I think that's a good learning lesson for our children. So as we raise our children, we need to show them the difference between, let's say, child sacrifice, as we read it in the Bible, is this heinous thing, and Genesis 9 and other places where animals are actually sacrificed or can be used for food. There is a difference between that. And the Bible is clear. You and I have talked about this offline about the humane treatment of animals and even the ways in which they're slaughtered for sacrifice and for food and consuming them. But never should we mix up those principles. So this last Sunday, I quoted that statement from PETA: a dog is a rat, as a pig is a boy. That's Newkirk's kind of famous line that they base PETA off of. We're all the same. We're all God's creatures. That is just not true.
Yeah.
And
absolutely,
we need to teach our children that. We need to teach our churches that. We need to advocate for human dignity in a world which is quickly demeaning human dignity.
Yeah.
Through ways that they're not even aware of sometimes. The one that comes to mind, and this is hotly debated, is kind of legally assisted suicide. Why? Why not put somebody out of their misery, a human being, if we do that with dogs? And the quickest answer to that is because humans are different than dogs.
Yeah.
And God is ultimately the one who determines when a human being's life is going to be required of them. That might bring up another issue that we can tackle another time, capital punishment, but it's probably enough for one podcast.
Sure. I mean, even on that, I just think about how many people get saved at the last minute in that 11 o'clock hour. And I mean, God's sovereign. We obviously know that, but just are the people that are fighting for these things fighting against that aspect of just give up on this person and move on? And we're not meant to. I mean, even if we see no fruit, no results, I've got many family members in my life that are a testament to I would not, in any other sense, I would have given up on seeing any faith, any walk of faith in their life. And I'm starting to see fruit in that after I've been around 38 years, they're in their 70s. So I absolutely agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So legally accepted suicide or assisted suicide is not moral. It's not morally assisted suicide. There is a moral argument that we have to make as Christians that this is not right.
Yeah.
And keep advocating, I guess, against that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your time again, Dr. Caffey. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today for Theology in Action. For more content, you can check out vbvf.org. We stream our Sunday and Wednesday services on there, and you can stay tuned for more Theology in Action.